at Thar's Garage. In this video, I'll be working on the Serpent SRX8 GTe long wheelbase, bag 2. So let's get started. So bag 2 is continuation of bag 1, the rear assembly. Look at that, nice and very thick carbon fiber rear tower. That thick 2.7 millimeter sway bar. Careful, there's a bag with 2 O-rings. Want to make sure we don't lose that. We're going to need our rear diff later on. Right, so for the first step, we're going to need this piece, which is for the rear pinion gear. I believe this is going to be the hardware for that. So this is the rear pinion gear I had just mentioned. For this particular step, it shows that we need to use a 8 by 11 by 0.2 shim, which is not in this bag, but I did have an extra shim from one of the earlier bags, which is what we need. So I have one of those. So the way this is going to install is we're going to install the shim onto the pinion gear. Then we're going to go ahead and install, there's 2 bearings here. We're going to install the larger one on, and then this is going to go into this aluminum piece here. There's 2 sides to it. We're going to go into the larger hole where this bearing will fit in. Surprised that this piece is aluminum. I feel like a lot of manufacturers would make this out of plastic. We're going to install the other bearing, which is a 5 by 13 by 4 bearing. Then we're going to install the drive cup with the set screw hole facing the flat on the pinion shaft. So I want to line those 2 up. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add some blue Loctite to this set screw so it doesn't back out since it's going into aluminum. And in the manual, it actually says to thread lock it. It's the first time I've seen that icon. The thread seemed a little tight, so just be aware of that. I think it's just the anodizing or the coloring on the outdrive. But everything's tight. Just going to wipe off any excess thread locker that's on there. And now we can install this assembly onto the chassis. So we're going to need 2 M3 by 20 screws that are going to be these cap screws here. They're not going to be button heads like this. And then we're going to need 2 M3 by 10 screws that are also cap screws like so. And since these are all going into metal, we're going to add some thread locker onto there. And the way this is going to install is there's a short side and a long side. The long side is actually going to be facing downward and the short side will be facing up. And it's going to install like so. just kind of work its way. And then we're going to install the two M3x10 screws on the top and the two M3x20 screws from the bottom. I'm not going to tighten these down just yet. I just want to get it started. So once I get everything started, then I can go ahead and tighten it down. And the other two screws are going to install in these two holes here. With that done, we can move on to step 11. 11.1 is to get the sway bar ready for installation. I'm going to set this aside for a little bit. So we need the sway bar. We need the sway bar mounts, which are nice aluminum pieces. It's pretty beautiful how they did these. So we need these two pieces. We're also going to need the two 5x8x2.5 flanged bearings. Got two of those. We're also going to need these aluminum collars, and it doesn't say to do so yet, but we're going to need two M3x3 set screws. So I actually want to install those first with just a bit of Loctite, because these are kind of hard to install in the car when these are rotating on the shaft or rotating on the sway bar itself. So I'm gonna thread it in, make sure there's some Loctite in the threads, and then just back it out a little bit. So the way these are gonna install is that this is gonna be the front of the vehicle, and this is gonna be towards the inside of the vehicle. Right, so this is the left side of the car, this is going to be the right side of the car. So the way this is going to install is we're going to have our flange bearing that goes in there. It sits nicely like so. And then the collar is going to install in there like so. So I'm going to go ahead and install my collar. And the way to get the collar on is with the cutout, you want to face it towards the inside, and it can get around the bend, just like so. So I'm going to do that on both sides. And get our... I'm not going to tighten anything down yet. Everything's kind of ready to install like so. Now we can go ahead and install our diff. So what we need is the diff itself, and we're going to need the diff insert. So the stock setting is the high setting for the diff. So we can get those two out and trim if necessary. Okay, so with the sway bar attached in its mounts, we can move on to installing the differential into the transmission with the two high inserts. Make sure you're using the same insert on both sides, otherwise it won't fit. So basically all you gotta do is kind of slide it in and then rotate into position. So it is kind of cumbersome to do this. It doesn't quite fit perfectly like it should. In my opinion, I think kind of a bad design. As you can see, like one side went in fine, the other side there's still kind of a gap. So yeah, so that one particular side doesn't quite want to install. So let's see if we can install these, and hopefully it'll help position it into place. Doesn't seem like it's positioning into place, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen up all these transmission screws and see if we can get enough play and everything to slide this perfectly into position. Using the right mounts, our diff inserts, and try swapping sides and see if that might help. It'll look like that may have done it. So I'm going to go ahead and install the two screws that go back here. They're M4x20 flathead screws. So see, I'm going to go ahead and put some blue Loctite on those and see if I can get those started. I can go ahead and tighten down all the transmission screws since everything is now installed. Okay, so with those installed, we can move on to installing the screws, set screws into the sway bar collars, and installing the sway bar into the rod ends. And I'm surprised that there's no indication on how to install the sway bar in terms of where along the sway bar to install it. Usually it says either flush or a few millimeters from the end. So I'm just going to go ahead and install it flush, and then when I set up the car after it's built, then I'll go ahead and adjust it to make sure it's even side to side. I can make sure that the flange bearings are sitting properly, and we can install that set screw. And there we go. So with that done, we can move on to installing the rear shock tower and mounts for either the body post or the wings. So it looks like we need to put together this piece here, and looks like all we got to do is first trim this. Some flashing off of here. So this isn't completely round, there's some flats on both sides, and those are going to install in here, and there's a channel for those flats so it won't rotate when you install it. Just like so. There's a little bit of flashing here. I'm going to go ahead and trim. Okay, so it goes just like that. And now we can install the rear shock tower with two M3x18 screws and two M3x25 screws. And doesn't quite show it, but it looks like it will go into aluminum. So we want to add thread locker on all these screws. So it looks like the way this is going to install is like so. Yeah, I think so the way it's going to install is the M3 by 18 screws are going to go in to these holes here, and then the M3 by 25 screws are going to be going through the transmission itself, then through both of these into the transmission. So just take note of that. I'll try to get everything started first, and then I'll go back and tighten it down. Before we forget, in step 10.1, we had to install the O-ring in the drive cup, which I didn't do, so don't forget that. The O-ring doesn't quite fit in there nicely, it's a bit oversized, but just kind of keep an eye on it and make sure that when you install your drive shaft that the O-ring sits how it's supposed to. There are some issues with the rear transmission. It's a unique design. I can't say I appreciate it. I think the X-Ray was a little easier to install the rear diff inserts. I just feel like even though there's two bolts, or there's two screws to kind of get this whole assembly off, I still think it's going to be difficult to make changes. I don't think it's a very easy access to the diff, so be wary of that. But other than that, it went together fairly easy. But again, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please stay tuned for my next video, which is going to be bag 3, the continuation of the rear assembly. It's going to be the axles and hubs. So stay tuned for that. And again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.